After 33 years of marriage, he filed for divorce. At court, he held her hand and said, "My new wife deserves the house." I said nothing, but when the judge read the title deed, his smile died. The name on it was mine, and mine alone. Before we continue, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to hear my story. If you're comfortable, let me know where you're listening from, and what time it is where you are. Now let me tell you my story. The end of my 20-year marriage arrived on a Tuesday. It did not come with a crash of thunder or a torrent of tears, but with the quiet clinical precision of a business decision. Marcus chose the dining room as his venue, a space I had spent months designing, with its warm walnut table and soft ambient lighting. It was a room meant for celebration, for lingering over wine with friends. He had turned it into a boardroom. He waited until I had cleared our dinner plates, his own meal of grilled salmon and asparagus barely touched. He sat perfectly still, his hands steepled on the table, a posture I recognized from his quarterly sales meetings. At 47, Marcus was still a handsome man, his charisma a well-honed tool he wielded with effortless skill. He had the kind of easy smile and confident charm that made people want to trust him, to invest in him. I had been his primary investor for 2 decades. "Naomi," he began, his voice the smooth, reasonable tone he used when closing a deal. "We need to talk. I'm no longer happy. I haven't been for some time." I stood by the sideboard, a stack of porcelain plates growing heavy in my hands. The words were so cliché, so utterly devoid of originality that for a moment I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were watching a poorly written television drama. He didn't wait for a response. "I've been doing a lot of thinking about my future, about what I want for the next chapter of my life. And this," he gestured vaguely to the room, to the house, to the 20 years of shared history between us. "This isn't it anymore." He finally looked at me, his gaze not unkind, but utterly devoid of warmth. It was the look a CEO gives a loyal, long-serving employee before handing them their severance package. "I've filed for divorce," he said. The plates in my hands suddenly felt impossibly fragile. I carefully set them down on the sideboard, my movements slow and deliberate, a desperate attempt to maintain a grip on the sudden violent tilting of my world. 20 years. 2 decades of building a life, a home, a history. He had just condensed it all into a single sterile announcement. I had been the quiet engine of our life together. My graphic design agency, which I had started from a spare bedroom with a second-hand Mac and a relentless work ethic, had become a highly successful, award-winning firm. It was my income that had paid for this house, for our European vacations, for the expensive private schools, for the very salmon on his plate. Marcus, a successful sales director in his own right, was brilliant at selling an image. He wore our lifestyle like one of his tailored Italian suits, taking effortless credit for the world I had so painstakingly built. I had never minded. I had seen us as a team, my quiet, creative work the foundation for his charismatic public-facing success. I had been a fool. "Is there someone else?" I asked, the question a raw whisper in the quiet room. He had the decency to hesitate, a flicker of something guilt, perhaps, or just annoyance at the untidiness of the question in his eyes. "That's not the point, Naomi," he said dismissively. "The point is that we've grown apart. We want different things. It's time to be honest about that and move forward." He stood up, adjusting the cuffs of his shirt. The meeting in his mind was over. He had delivered the news, stated his position. He was already moving on to the next item on his agenda. "I'll be staying at the club for a while until we sort things out," he said. "My lawyer will be in touch with yours." And with that he walked out of the room, leaving me alone with the ruins of our life. There was no shouting, no final passionate argument. My marriage hadn't ended in a fire. It had simply been liquidated. The days that followed were a blur of hollowed-out shock. The house, my beautiful, carefully designed sanctuary, felt vast and silent, every room echoing with the ghost of a life that was no longer mine. I moved through it like a stranger, the familiar objects of my life, the art on the walls, the books on the shelves, seeming to belong to someone else. The confirmation that there was, of course, someone else came less than a week later. My best friend Anya had dragged me out of the house, insisting that what I needed was not to wallow in my grief, but to get dressed, put on lipstick and have a very expensive cocktail at the city's trendiest new rooftop bar. "You're not a widow, Naomi," she had said, her voice a sharp, loving command. "You're a single woman with an excellent portfolio. Act like it." We were sitting at a small table overlooking the glittering cityscape when I saw him. Marcus was at a prime table near the railing, holding court, his laughter echoing across the terrace. He looked vibrant, energized, a man reborn, and across from him, leaning in, her hand resting intimately on his, was a young woman. She couldn't have been older than 28. She had the kind of effortless, youthful beauty that feels like a personal insult when your own face is beginning to show the roadmap of a life lived. Her hair was a cascade of honey blonde waves, her dress a sliver of silk that seemed to have been artfully draped rather than worn. As I watched, a cold, sickening certainty washed over me. This was not a colleague. This was not a friend. This was her. This was the next chapter Marcus had been planning. He saw me then, his eyes met mine across the crowded terrace, and for a moment a flicker of panic crossed his face. He hadn't expected to see me here, in his new world, but the panic was quickly replaced by a cool, almost defiant arrogance. He stood up, pulling his young companion with him, and began to walk toward our table. It was a power move, a deliberate act of confrontation. "Naomi," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "I didn't expect to see you out." "Anya insisted," I said, my own voice miraculously steady. He gestured to the young woman beside him. "This is Isabel Thorne, a colleague from work. Izzy, this is Naomi." "Isabel? Izzy?" The name was as young and bright as she was. She looked at me, and her smile was a masterpiece of condescending pity. It was a smile that said, "Oh, you're the old one, the one being replaced. How sad for you." It was a smile of pure, unadulterated victory. "It's so nice to finally meet you," she said, her voice a light, musical chime. "Marcus has told me so much about you." I had no doubt that he had, and I had no doubt that the story he had told was a carefully edited one, casting him as the long-suffering husband, finally escaping a stale, unhappy marriage. The three of them, Anya, Marcus, and Isabel, exchanged a few more meaningless pleasantries. I said nothing. I simply sat there, absorbing the scene, my designer's eye taking in every detail. The way Isabel's hand was still possessively on Marcus's arm, the expensive brand-new watch on her wrist, a watch I recognized as one Marcus had been admiring for months. The way he looked at her, a look of foolish, doting adoration he hadn't given me in a decade. They finally moved on, leaving Anya and me in the wake of their glamorous, destructive passage. I watched them go, a handsome, successful man and his beautiful young new love, a perfect picture of a midlife crisis cliché. "Well," Anya said, her voice a low, dangerous growl, "at least we know the name of the plaintiff in Thorn Verrett's. Your entire net worth." I took a long, slow sip of my martini. The cold, clean burn of the gin did little to numb the fresh, raw wound in my chest. I had just met my replacement, and she was already redecorating my life. The following Monday I walked into Anya Sharma's law office. The space was a reflection of Anya herself. Sleek, modern, and radiating an air of intimidating competence. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, and the furniture was a collection of sharp, clean lines in black leather and steel. It was a space designed for strategy, for battle. Anya, my best friend since we were college roommates, greeted me not with a hug, but with a firm professional handshake. Today she was not my friend, she was my lawyer. At 46, she was a shark in a world of minnows, one of the city's most respected and feared divorce attorneys. Her usual warm, laughing eyes were now sharp, focused, and ready for war. "Okay, Naomi," she said, closing the door to her corner office. "No more tears, no more shock. From this moment on, this is not a tragedy, it is a business negotiation. You are the CEO of your life, Inc., and we are about to liquidate a non-performing asset. Got it?" Her tough, no-nonsense approach was exactly what I needed. It was a life raft of cold, hard logic in the emotional storm I was drowning in. I nodded. "Got it." "Good," she said, gesturing for me to sit. She sat opposite me, a yellow legal pad and a pen, her only weapons on the vast empty expanse of her desk. "Let's audit your life, Naomi. Every asset, every account, every stock, every bond, every piece of art you've bought over the past 20 years. I want a complete financial picture, down to the last paperclip." For the next hour we did just that, I with my accountant's memory for numbers, and she with her lawyer's instinct for leverage, began to assemble the balance sheet of my marriage. We talked about my business, its valuation, its income stream. We talked about our investment portfolio, the retirement accounts, the cars. Finally Anya leaned forward, her expression serious. "Okay, let's talk about the big one. The house. The fortress. Tell me about 125 Willow Creek Lane." "What about it?" I asked. It's a 5-bedroom colonial in the best school district. We bought it right after we got married. It's worth a fortune now. I know what it is, Naomi, she said patiently. I want to know who owns it, legally, on paper. She tapped her pen on the legal pad. Is everything in order with the title deed? A small secret door in the back of my mind, a door I hadn't opened in 20 years, creaked open. A memory surfaced sharp and clear. Yes, I said, a new strange note in my voice. Everything is in order. Anya's eyes narrowed. She knew me too well. She could hear the unspoken subtext in my words. What does in order mean exactly? And so I told her. I told her about the down payment, about the closing, about a busy afternoon 2 decades ago. As I spoke, Anya's professional mask began to crack. A slow, sharp, predatory smile spread across her face. It was the smile of a hunter who has just spotted a fatal, unexpected weakness in her prey. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair, a low, appreciative whistle escaping her lips. "Oh, Naomi," she said, her voice a purr of pure, unadulterated delight. "Oh, you magnificent, beautiful, unintentional genius." She tapped her pen on the pad again, the sound a sharp, decisive click. "This changes everything," she said. "This is not just a negotiating chip. This is the whole game. This is our checkmate." A small, strategic seed planted 20 years ago out of pure happenstance had just been rediscovered, and with Anya's expert guidance, I knew it was about to grow into a formidable and legally binding tree of justice. That night, alone in the vast, quiet house that was now the center of a brewing legal storm, my mind drifted back 2 decades. The memory, which had been a dusty, forgotten file in the archives of my life, came back to me with a vivid, almost cinematic clarity. It was the spring of 2005. I was 26, a newlywed, and my graphic design business, then just a one-woman operation called Naomi Dubois Designs, had just landed its first major contract. It was a huge rebranding project for a regional bank, a deal that had taken months of sleepless nights and relentless pitching to secure. The fee was substantial, more money than I had ever seen in my life. Marcus and I had been married for 6 months. He was a junior salesman at a tech firm then, full of charm and ambition, but his salary was a fraction of what he earned now. We were living in a cramped second-floor apartment that always smelled faintly of our downstairs neighbors' cooking. My big contract was our ticket out, our chance to buy a real home. I found the house on my own. It was a handsome but neglected colonial on Willow Creek Lane, a street lined with mature oak trees. It had good bones, a beautiful garden overgrown with weeds, and a sense of quiet, permanent dignity that spoke to me. I saw not just a house but a future, a place to raise a family, to build a life. The down payment came entirely from my contract fee. It was a significant sum, enough to secure the property and leave us with a manageable mortgage. I remember the pride I felt signing that check. It was the first tangible proof of my success, the first brick in the foundation of the life I was building. The day of the closing was a frantic, rain-swept Tuesday in May. I had a final presentation for the bank rebranding in the morning, and the closing was scheduled for 2 o'clock. Marcus was supposed to meet me at the lawyer's office. I remember standing in the formal wood-paneled office of the real estate attorney, the air thick with the smell of old paper and furniture polish. The seller, an elderly man moving to Florida, was there with his own lawyer. I kept looking at the door, then at my watch. 2 o'clock became 2:15, then 2:30. Finally, my phone rang. It was Marcus, his voice tinny and full of static. "Naomi, babe, I'm so sorry," he said, his voice a rush of breathless apology. "I'm completely swamped. My biggest client just walked in. There's no way I can get out of this. You're going to have to handle the closing on your own. You can do that, right?" I was disappointed, of course, but I understood. Or I told myself I understood. He was ambitious, driven. That was part of what I loved about him. "Of course," I said, trying to keep the disappointment out of my voice. "Don't worry about it. I can handle it." So I did. I sat at that long, polished table and I signed my name over and over again on a mountain of legal documents. The lawyer, a kind, fatherly man, patiently explained each one. When we got to the final document, the title deed, he paused. "Now for the name on the title," he said. "Since you are the sole source of the down payment and will be the primary name on the mortgage application, we can list it in your name alone, as your sole and separate property, or we can list it in both your names, as joint tenants." I hesitated. The traditional romantic part of me, The part that was a 6-month newlywed wanted to put both our names on it, but the practical newly minted business owner, the woman who had just single-handedly earned the money to make this all possible, had a different instinct. My name alone, please, I said, a decision made in a split second of gut feeling. It's just cleaner that way, for now. The lawyer nodded, unfazed. As you wish. Now what name will you be taking title under? I hadn't even legally changed my name yet. The paperwork was still sitting on our apartment's cluttered kitchen counter. My maiden name, I said. Naomi Dubois. So I signed, Naomi Dubois, a name I hadn't used in 20 years. A name that was now, I realized with a jolt of electrifying clarity, legally and irrevocably tied to the single greatest asset of my marriage. It hadn't been a secret. It hadn't been a trick. It was just a fact, a detail from a busy afternoon 2 decades ago. A fact that Marcus, in his rush to build his own career on the foundation of my success, had either never known, or had long since forgotten, or had simply in his supreme arrogance chosen to ignore. And that single forgotten fact was about to become the cornerstone of my defense. The first volley in the legal war arrived a week after my consultation with Anya. It came via a sleek black-clad courier, a man who looked more like he was delivering state secrets than legal documents. The envelope was thick and heavy with the weight of my husband's expectations. I sat at my dining room table, the same table where Marcus had so coolly detonated our marriage, and opened the envelope with a pearl-handled letter opener, a small anachronistic act of defiance. The documents inside were a testament to the breathtaking scope of his entitlement, a masterwork of revisionist history. It was a petition filed by his lawyer, a man with a notoriously aggressive reputation. I read through the legalese, my initial shock quickly hardening into a cold diamond-hard anger. Marcus wasn't just asking for a divorce, he was demanding a hostile takeover of the life I had built. His demands were audacious. He wanted 50% of the value of my business, Naomi Vance Designs. He had conveniently reframed my 20 years of 16-hour days of sleepless nights wrestling with creative blocks, of the constant grinding stress of running a successful agency, as a joint marital effort. He claimed his role as a supportive spouse and his invaluable networking on the corporate golf circuit were direct contributions to my success. He was painting himself as the silent partner, the strategic genius behind the scenes, and now he was here to collect his share of the profits. He wanted spousal support. Despite his own 6-figure salary, he claimed that he had become accustomed to a certain standard of living during our marriage. A standard, I noted with bitter irony, that had been entirely funded by me and that he would require ongoing financial support to maintain this lifestyle post-divorce. But the centerpiece of his petition, the crown jewel of his audacious demands, was the house. He was demanding sole and exclusive possession of the marital home at 125 Willow Creek Lane. I had to read that section twice to fully absorb the sheer unmitigated gall of it. He argued that the house was the primary asset of the marriage, and that he, as the party who was being displaced, deserved to remain in it for his emotional and professional stability. He painted a picture of himself as the stable long-term resident, the keeper of the flame, while I was an ephemeral presence, a woman so consumed by her career that the house was merely a place for me to sleep. He even had the audacity to suggest that I, the sole breadwinner for much of our marriage, would be more financially flexible when it came to finding new accommodations. He was in effect arguing that my success should be the very reason I was the one to be made homeless. But the most telling part was the legal language his lawyer used. The entire petition was constructed around the absolute, unshakable, and completely false assumption that the house was joint property, a marital asset to be divided. There were phrases like the parties shared real estate, the jointly held property, and the division of the primary marital residence. They had no idea. They had not done the most basic, fundamental piece of due diligence, a title search. They were so blinded by their own arrogance, so convinced of the traditional narrative of the successful husband and the wife, whose assets were naturally subsumed into his, that they had not bothered to check the actual legal ownership of the property. I sat there in the quiet sunlit dining room of the house they were trying to take from me, and I started to laugh. It was not a happy laugh. It was a low, bitter, and slightly unhinged sound. They were building a magnificent, towering legal case on a foundation of pure sand. They were arguing with absolute conviction about the ownership of a thing that had never, not for a single day in 20 years, belonged to them. The documents were not just a list of demands, they were a confession of their own incompetence. And they were the most beautiful, damning piece of evidence I could have ever hoped for. I scanned the entire audacious document and emailed it to Anya with a single succinct subject line, the opening salvo. Her reply came less than 5 minutes later, on my way. Don't touch anything, don't reply, don't even breathe in its direction, and for God's sake, open a bottle of that expensive Pinot Noir you've been saving. An hour later she was sitting opposite me at my dining room table, the offending legal petition spread out between us like a battle map. She read through it, a slow, predatory smile spreading across her face. She was not just reading a legal document, she was savoring it, enjoying every self-important clause, every baseless assumption. This, she said, finally looking up, her eyes shining with a warrior's glee, is the most beautifully arrogant piece of legal fiction I have ever had the pleasure of reading. His lawyer is either lazy or a complete idiot, or both. So what do we do? I asked, pushing a glass of the Pinot Noir toward her. We respond, right? We send them a copy of the deed and tell them they've made a catastrophic error. We shut this whole argument down before it even begins. It was my instinct as a designer, as a problem solver, identify the error and correct it immediately. Anya took a long, slow sip of her wine, her eyes narrowed in thought. No, she said finally, setting the glass down with a soft click. No, we do not. I stared at her. What do you mean? No, why on earth wouldn't we? Because, my dear heartbroken and soon-to-be fabulously vindicated friend, she said, leaning forward, her voice a low conspiratorial purr, your husband has just handed us the rope. And our job is not to show it to him, our job is to let him meticulously and publicly hang himself with it. She explained her strategy, and it was as brilliant as it was ruthless. Right now Marcus and his bargain bin lawyer are operating under a single fundamental delusion, that they have a legal claim to this house. It is the cornerstone of their entire case. It is the foundation of his ridiculous demand for your business, for spousal support. He's building his entire vision of his new life with Izzy on the assumption that he gets to keep this house. She took another sip of wine. If we correct him now, he'll be humiliated. Yes, but he will also recalibrate. He'll pivot. He'll adjust his demands. He'll come after your business even harder. Demand more of your savings. The fight will be messy, and it will be about a dozen different things. But if we say nothing, if we let him continue to believe this fantasy, her smile returned, sharp and dangerous, we let him build his entire case, his entire public narrative, his entire future, around getting this house. We let him tell all your mutual friends that he's being generous by letting you keep more of your savings in exchange for the property. We let him posture and preen and build his pedestal as high as he possibly can. I began to see the cold, brutal genius of it. It was a strategy of passive resistance, a legal rope-a-dope. We will fight him on every other point, she continued. We will counter his offer for your business. We will laugh his spousal support claim out of the room. But on the house, we will be vague. We will be non-committal. We will simply say, the disposition of the marital home is a matter for the court to decide. We will offer no correction. We will provide no evidence to the contrary. We will let him march his entire army onto a battlefield that, unbeknownst to him, is a minefield. The strategy was painful. It meant enduring months of his posturing, of his lies, of the pitying looks from friends who only heard his side of the story. It meant sitting in mediation rooms, and listening to him argue about a future in a house he would never own. It will be hard, Naomi, Anya said, her voice softening, the friend re-emerging from behind the lawyer. It will require you to sit there and listen to his nonsense, to bite your tongue until it bleeds. But I promise you, when that judge reads the name on that title deed aloud in open court, the look on his face will be worth every single second of it. I looked at her, at the fierce loyalty and brilliant strategic mind that I was so lucky to have on my side. The path she was laying out was difficult, but the destination was justice. A pure, simple and undeniable justice. Okay, I said, a slow, determined smile of my own beginning to form. Let him build his gallows. I'll hand him the nails. The strategy of silence was, as Anya had predicted, excruciating. For the next 2 months, I lived in a state of suspended animation, a quiet actor in a play whose script only I and my lawyer truly understood. I endured a series of tense, unproductive meetings with our legal teams, where Marcus's lawyer would posture and bloviate about his client's deep sentimental attachment to the house, and Anya would respond with a calm, non-committal, "We will let the court adjudicate the matter of the property." Marcus, baffled and enraged by my refusal to simply roll over and surrender, decided to escalate his psychological warfare. The most galling incident came on a bright, cold Saturday afternoon in November. He called, his voice a mask of false politeness, to say he needed to stop by to pick up his golf clubs and some other personal effects. It was a transparent excuse, a power play designed to assert his continued access to the house, to remind me that this was still in his mind his territory. He did not come alone. I opened the door to find him standing on my porch, an arrogant smirk on his face, and beside him, clinging to his arm, was Isabel. She was dressed in a ridiculously expensive-looking cream-colored cashmere coat, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her face a mask of polite, predatory curiosity. She was here to inspect her future prize. "Naomi," Marcus said, his voice dripping with condescension. "I hope you don't mind. Izzy was just helping me run some errands, so I brought her along. I figured it was time she saw the place in the daylight." He was not asking for my permission. He was informing me of his decision. Before I could respond, he brushed past me, leading Isabel into the entryway as if he were the host and I the hired help. "It's lovely, darling," Isabel said, her voice a light, airy chime that grated on my every nerve. She let her coat slide from her shoulders, revealing a chic black dress underneath, and handed the coat to me without looking, as if I were the maid. I stood there for a moment, the impossibly soft, heavy cashmere in my hands, a symbol of their casual, unthinking insolence. I laid it carefully over a chair, my movements slow and deliberate, my face a blank mask. While Marcus went to the garage to retrieve his golf clubs, a task that should have taken 5 minutes but which he stretched into a half-hour tour of the property, Isabel made herself at home. She did not sit, she wandered. She drifted through my living room, my dining room, her eyes scanning everything, assessing, judging, mentally redecorating. She ran her perfectly manicured, blood-red fingernails over the rough stone surface of the fireplace mantel. "I've always wanted a real wood-burning fireplace," she said, not to me, but to the room, to Marcus, who was now lingering in the doorway enjoying the show. "We'll have so many wonderful Christmases here, won't we, darling?" She trailed her fingers over the spines of the books in my library, a collection of first editions I had lovingly curated over 30 years. "We'll need to clear some of these out," she murmured, "to make room for a proper media center." She stood in the center of the kitchen, a space I had designed myself with custom cabinetry and warm, Italian slate floors, and surveyed it with a critical eye. "This is a good start," she said, "but the backsplash is a bit dated, and I think a Sub-Zero fridge would fit much better in that alcove." She was not just a guest in my home. She was an invading force, and she was discussing her plans for its renovation right in front of me. She never once addressed me directly. She spoke only to Marcus or to the air, her every word a calculated act of erasure, a way of making it clear that I was already a ghost, a former resident whose opinions were irrelevant. I said nothing. I simply followed her, a silent, invisible shadow in my own home, my heart a cold, hard knot of rage in my chest. With every dismissive comment, with every arrogant assumption, she was not just insulting me, she was hammering another nail into her own, and Marcus's legal coffin. Anya's words echoed in my mind. "The higher the pedestal, the harder the fall." They were standing on the very peak of Mount Arrogance, admiring the view, completely unaware of the geological fault line that was about to open up right beneath their feet. And I, the quiet, passive, invisible woman they were so casually dismissing, was the one with her hand on the detonator. With the court date looming and my steadfast refusal to capitulate on the issue of the house, Marcus's tactics shifted from overt displays of arrogance to a more insidious, covert campaign of psychological pressure. He was a salesman, after all, and he knew that if the direct approach failed, you simply found another, more subtle way to close the deal. His goal was to wear me down, to make my life so uncomfortable and uncertain that I would eventually break and give him what he wanted, just to make it all stop. The campaign began with a series of emails, not from him directly but from online real estate websites to which he had clearly subscribed me. Every morning my inbox would be filled with listings for small, sad one-bedroom apartments in undesirable neighborhoods on the other side of town. The subject lines were always chirpy and automated. "New listings you'll love in North Industrial Park," or "Price drop on this cozy studio near the freeway." Each email was a small, digital jab, a reminder that my time in my own home was limited, a helpful suggestion for the bleak, downsized future he had planned for me. It was a petty, passive-aggressive act of cruelty, designed to create a constant, low-grade hum of anxiety in my life. I simply created a new filter in my email account that sent anything from Zillow or Redfin directly to the trash, and never mentioned them. Next, he began to weaponize our mutual friends. He launched a public relations tour, meeting for drinks and lunches with couples we had known for years, where he would perform his role as the heartbroken, benevolent victim. The first inkling I had of this was a phone call from an old friend, Susan, her voice full of a confused, pitying concern. "Naomi, honey, I just had lunch with Marcus," she said. "He told me about the settlement offer. It sounds so generous of him to let you keep more of your business savings if you just let him have the house. He says he just wants to keep it for the sentimental value, for the memories." I stood in my kitchen clutching the phone, my knuckles white. He was painting me as the unreasonable, money-grubbing one, the cold businesswoman who valued her company more than the sentimental home she had shared with him. He was twisting my silence, my refusal to engage on the topic, into proof of my heartlessness. "It's more complicated than that, Susan," I said, my voice carefully neutral. I could not tell her the truth. I could not reveal my trump card. The strategy of silence was absolute. I just had to endure the misunderstanding, the judgment. "I'd rather not discuss the details of the divorce, if you don't mind." The calls kept coming. Each one was a small cut, a fresh wave of hurt and frustration. He was not just trying to take my house. He was trying to take my friends, my history, my reputation. He was salting the earth of my entire life. The final and most infuriating phase of his campaign was directed at my own work. He knew how much my agency, my creation, meant to me. And so he began to attack it. He started a quiet rumor among his corporate contacts that Naomi Vance Designs was in turmoil due to the divorce, that I was distracted and unreliable. I found out when a long-standing client, a man I had worked with for a decade, called me with a strange, hesitant tone. He asked if the project was still on track, if I had the bandwidth to handle it. When I pressed him, he reluctantly admitted that he had heard from a mutual acquaintance, Marcus of course, that I was having a difficult time and that my business might be suffering. That was the moment my resolve hardened from steel to diamond. He had come after my home. He had come after my friends. And now, he was coming after my life's work. The one thing I had built with my own two hands. The very source of the wealth he was so desperate to claim. I documented every incident, every email, every phone call, every piece of professional sabotage in a new section of my ledger, which I had titled Campaign of Harassment. The evidence mounted. His pressure was not making me weaker. It was making my case stronger. He thought he was closing in for the kill, but all he was doing was providing me with more and more ammunition for the final inevitable battle. The culmination of Marcus's pressure campaign came not in a shadowy rumor or a passive-aggressive email, but in the sterile neutral territory of a mediator's office. Enya had warned me that this would be the next step, a legally mandated attempt to settle the divorce out of court. "He'll see it as his stage," she had said, "his final best chance to bully you into submission before a judge gets involved." The mediator's office was a landscape of beige walls, beige carpet, beige chairs. It was a space designed to be so utterly devoid of personality that it could not possibly offend anyone. It was the most depressing room I had ever been in. Marcus and his lawyer were already there when Anya and I arrived. Marcus was the picture of magnanimity, a man burdened by the sad but necessary business of dismantling a life. He wore a somber charcoal suit, his expression one of grave concern. He was performing the role of the good guy in this divorce, the one who just wanted a fair and amicable solution. We sat on opposite sides of a large, polished table. The mediator, a tired-looking woman in her 60s, gave a weary practice speech about cooperation and compromise. Then she turned the floor over to Marcus's lawyer. He launched into a long, self-serving monologue, painting Marcus as a man of deep sentimental attachment and incredible generosity. He spoke of Marcus's desire to preserve the family home, a place filled with 20 years of shared memories. He spoke of Marcus's selfless concern for my future, his desire to see me well provided for from the assets of my own business. Then he slid a document across the table. "To that end," the lawyer said, "Mr. Vance is prepared to make an extremely generous offer, one that we believe will bring this unfortunate matter to a swift and painless conclusion." The offer was exactly what Susan and my other friends had described. Now formalized in cold legal language, Marcus would relinquish his claim to 50% of my business, reducing it to a more reasonable 30%. He would also waive his claim for ongoing spousal support. In exchange, I would sign over the title of the house at 125 Willow Creek Lane to him free and clear. "It's a good deal, Naomi," Marcus said, speaking for the first time, his voice a low, sincere, and utterly false murmur. He leaned across the table, his eyes full of a counterfeit empathy. It gives you the lion's share of your company, the asset you care about most. It leaves you with more than enough capital to find a wonderful new place. And it saves us both from a messy, expensive court battle. It allows us to end this with dignity. He was offering to let me keep more of my own money, in exchange for the house he had no legal right to in the first place. He was selling me a property he didn't own. The sheer breathtaking audacity of it was almost sublime. He truly believed he was being generous. He truly believed he held all the cards. Anya and I had rehearsed this moment. I was to say nothing, to let her handle the formal response. But I couldn't resist. All eyes were on me. The mediator, his lawyer, even Anya, they were all waiting for my response to this generous offer. I looked directly at Marcus. I let the silence stretch, enjoying the flicker of anxious impatience in his eyes. He was so certain I would see the logic of his offer, that I would grasp this final benevolent olive branch he was extending. No, I said. The word was quiet, but it landed in the beige, silent room with the force of a wrecking ball. Marcus stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. No? What do you mean no? I mean no, I repeated, my voice still quiet, but now imbued with a cold, hard finality. I am not willing to do that. I offered no explanation, no counteroffer, no argument, just a simple two-letter unadorned refusal. The effect was magnificent. He was completely, utterly baffled. He looked at his lawyer, who looked equally confused. My refusal didn't make sense in the world they had constructed. Why would I turn down such a good deal? Why would I risk a court battle over a house when I was being offered a larger piece of my own company? Naomi, be reasonable, Marcus stammered, his magnanimous facade beginning to crack. This is the best offer you're going to get. Don't let emotion cloud your judgment. I simply looked at him and said nothing. He left the mediation in a state of sputtering, impotent rage. He had played his best card, made his most generous offer, and I had simply and inexplicably refused. He could not comprehend it. My silence, my simple, unexplained no, was a strategic move he could not counter because he could not understand the game I was playing. And his bafflement was a beautiful, satisfying thing to behold. The day of the final divorce hearing arrived on a crisp, mercilessly bright morning in early December. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue, a cruel and beautiful backdrop for the ugly business of the day. As I dressed, my hands trembled slightly. For months this day had been a distant, abstract point on the horizon. Now it was here, and no amount of strategic preparation could fully quell the deep, visceral anxiety that churned in my stomach. I chose my outfit with the care of a general selecting his uniform for a decisive battle. I wore a simple, beautifully tailored charcoal gray dress, a single strand of my mother's pearls, and low, sensible heels. My hair was styled in its usual neat, elegant chignon. I was not trying to look younger or more fashionable. I was trying to look exactly like what I was, a competent, serious, and successful woman of 46. I was dressing not for a divorce but for a board meeting. Anya met me on the steps of the county courthouse, a magnificent, imposing stone building with pillars and grand, intimidating arches. She too was dressed for battle, in a razor-sharp black pantsuit, her briefcase held like a shield. She gave my hand a firm, reassuring squeeze. "Ready?" she asked, her eyes scanning my face for any sign of weakness. "No," I said honestly, "but let's do this anyway." The atmosphere inside the courthouse was hushed and oppressive, the air thick with the scent of old paper, floor wax, and quiet desperation. We made our way through the security checkpoint and down a long marble hallway, our heels clicking a somber, rhythmic beat. We were early, but they were already there. Marcus and Isabel were standing at the far end of the hall, outside the courtroom door. They were not dressed in somber colors, they were dressed for a victory celebration. Marcus wore a perfectly tailored navy suit, a crisp white shirt, and a power tie. He looked confident, relaxed, a man on the cusp of a great triumph. And Isabel was a vision in winter white. She wore a chic, wide-legged pantsuit, her blonde hair pulled back in a sleek, severe ponytail. She looked less like a supportive fiancée and more like a glamorous co-conspirator, a beautiful predatory bird of prey. They stood close together, holding hands, a united, triumphant front. They were radiating a confidence so absolute it was almost blinding. They saw us approaching and Marcus's lips curved into a small, confident smile. He nodded at me, a magnanimous gesture from a king to a soon-to-be deposed rival. Isabel's smile was less generous. It was a thin, sharp, pitying line, the smile of a winner who can barely conceal her contempt for the loser. The message was clear. They had come here today not just to win, but to be seen winning. Their coordinated, glamorous appearance was another move in the psychological war, a final public display of their success and my impending failure. We sat on a bench on the opposite side of the hallway, creating a stark visual tableau of the two opposing camps. Enya opened her briefcase and began to review her notes, but I knew it was for show, a way to project an air of calm, professional focus. My own hands were clasped so tightly in my lap that my knuckles were white. I watched them. I watched Marcus whisper something in Isabel's ear, making her laugh, a light, tinkling laugh that echoed in the cold stone hallway. I watched him put a possessive arm around her waist. They were performing, not for me but for the world, for the other lawyers and plaintiffs who hurried past casting curious glances. They were the winners. I was the loser. I took a deep, steadying breath. Let them have their performance, I thought. Let them enjoy their final moments of blissful, arrogant ignorance. The stage was set. The audience was gathered. The final act was about to begin, and they had no idea that the script had been rewritten. The morning session was a tedious, grinding affair, a slow march through the legal minutiae of our shared life. We sat at opposing tables, the space between us a cold, unbridgeable chasm. The judge, a stern, no-nonsense woman named Judge Carol Esposito, listened with a weary patience as Marcus's lawyer and Anya sparred over the valuation of my business, the division of our stock portfolio, and the ownership of a ridiculously expensive set of antique maps Marcus had bought at an auction. On every point, Marcus's lawyer was aggressive, demanding, and utterly convinced of his client's position, and on every point except one, Anya was a formidable, impenetrable wall, batting away his arguments with a cool, surgical precision, citing precedents and financial records with an ease that clearly infuriated her opponent. The only point on which she was consistently vague was the house. When the topic of the primary residence was raised, she would simply and calmly state, "Your Honor, the disposition of the property at 125 Willow Creek Lane is a matter we believe will be most appropriately adjudicated by the court. Based on the legal documentation." She offered no argument, no claim, no emotional plea. She simply deferred, again and again, to the impending judgment. Just before noon, Judge Esposito called for a brief 15-minute recess before they would move on to the final division of the major assets, including the house. The tension in the room was palpable. This was the final round. As we all filed out into the hallway, Anya leaned in and whispered, "He's going to try something. This is his last chance to get to you before the hammer falls. Stay strong." I nodded, my mouth dry. I needed some air. I walked a little way down the cold marble hallway, toward a large window that overlooked the courthouse square. I stood there looking out at the normal, everyday world outside, people hurrying to lunch, pigeons scattering on the pavement, and tried to calm the frantic beating of my heart. I heard footsteps behind me. I didn't need to turn around. I could feel his presence, the familiar, arrogant energy that had once been the center of my life. Naomi. It was Marcus. He had cornered me. Isabel and his lawyer were at the other end of the hall, giving him space, a final opportunity for his legendary powers of persuasion to work their magic. I turned to face him. His face was a mask of sincere, heartfelt concern, a look I knew he had practiced in the mirror. It was his closing the deal face. "This is madness," he said, his voice a low, reasonable, and deeply manipulative plea. "Look at what we're doing, tearing each other apart in front of strangers, letting these lawyers drain our life savings. We had 20 years together, Naomi. It has to count for something." He took a step closer. Before I could react, he reached out and took my hand. His touch was a shock, a jolt of unwanted counterfeit intimacy. His skin was warm and dry, his grip firm and proprietary. It was a gesture designed to disarm me, to remind me of a time when his touch was a comfort, not a violation. It was the most cynical, calculated gesture I had ever experienced. He looked me directly in the eye, his own gaze full of a deep, sorrowful sincerity that was utterly, completely false. "We can end this right now, you and I," he said softly. "Just the two of us. We can walk back into that courtroom and tell the judge we've reached an agreement. We can walk away from this with our dignity intact." He was holding my hand, in the middle of a courthouse hallway, trying to sell me one last beautiful lie. The moment Anya had predicted was here, and it was even more repulsive than I had imagined. He squeezed my hand, A gesture that was meant to feel reassuring but felt like the closing of a trap. His eyes, which I had once loved for their warmth and humor, were now just the tools of his trade, expertly calibrated to project an aura of sincerity that was utterly hollow. "Naomi, just give me the house," he said, his voice a soft, condescending murmur, as if explaining a simple, undeniable truth to a child. "Be the bigger person. You know it's the right thing to do." I stared at him, my mind a maelstrom of shock, rage, and a strange, clinical detachment. He was actually doing it. He was playing the bigger person card, a classic manipulator's tactic designed to shame his victim into capitulating. He was framing his own greed as an opportunity for my moral growth. "It's not just a house to me," he continued, his voice thick with a counterfeit emotion. "It's our home. It's where we built our life. I know you're angry, and you have every right to be, but don't let that anger destroy 20 years of memories." He was weaponizing our shared past, twisting it into a tool to pry my property from my hands. Then came the final breathtaking blow. He glanced over his shoulder, a small, loving smile directed at Isabel, who was watching them from a distance, a silent, smug spectator. He then looked back at me, his expression now one of grave paternal responsibility. "It's not just for me, Naomi," he said, his voice dropping to an intimate whisper. "It's for Izzy too. My new wife deserves a fresh start, a beautiful stable home to begin our life in. She's been through so much with all this ugliness. She deserves this. Don't you think?" The sheer, unmitigated audacity of the statement was like a physical blow. He was standing here, holding my hand, telling me that his 28-year-old mistress, the woman who had helped detonate our marriage, deserved my home. He was asking me, the wronged wife, to provide the venue for their happy ending, to literally and figuratively give them the keys to the life he had stolen from me. He saw the flicker of shock in my eyes and misinterpreted it as indecision, as a sign that his brilliant emotional appeal was working. He pressed his advantage. "Think of it, Naomi," he said, his voice full of a warm, expansive generosity. "You walk away with your business, your freedom. Izzy and I get to start our new life. The house stays in the family. In a way, everyone wins. All you have to do is say yes. Just be the gracious, elegant woman I always knew you were." He was offering me the role of the benevolent, sacrificial martyr, the noble ex-wife who steps aside with grace and dignity. He wasn't just asking for my house, he was asking for my complicity in my own erasure. He was asking me to bless his and Isabel's union with the single greatest asset I owned. It was the most profoundly insulting, most deeply narcissistic request I had ever heard in my entire life. And it was the final beautiful damning piece of the puzzle I needed. My first instinct, a primal white-hot surge of pure rage, was to slap him. My second was to laugh in his face, a loud, hysterical, and deeply satisfying laugh. My third was to unleash a torrent of verbal fury, to tell him exactly what I thought of him, of his deserving new wife, and of his monstrous, breathtaking entitlement. But I did none of those things. Instead, I thought of Anya. I thought of our strategy. I thought of the cold, hard, beautiful logic of the trap we had set. This was the final moment of the charade. This was the moment for quiet dignity, for the absolute, unreadable power of silence. I did nothing. I simply looked at him. I looked from his hand, which was still holding mine in its warm, manipulative grip, up to his confident, pleading face. I let him see the shock in my eyes, but I did not let him see the rage that burned behind it. I let my face remain a blank, unreadable mask. Then slowly, deliberately, I pulled my hand away from his. It was not a sharp, angry snatch. It was a slow, final, and unequivocal withdrawal of contact. A severing. I said nothing. My silence was absolute. It was not an angry silence. It was not a hurt silence. It was an empty silence, a void. It was the silence of a closed door, of a deadline, of a finished conversation. I simply stood there, my hands now clasped loosely in front of me, and met his gaze without expression. Marcus was utterly baffled. He had expected a reaction. He had been prepared for tears, for anger, for a final emotional capitulation. He was not prepared for this. He was not prepared for nothing. My silence was a language he did not speak. It was a blank wall against which his considerable powers of manipulation were useless. "Naomi," he said, his confident smile faltering for the first time, "did you hear what I said?" I continued to look at him, my expression unchanging. "This is your last chance to be reasonable," he said, a note of frustration, of panic, creeping into his voice. "Don't force my hand in there. You won't like the outcome. He was resorting to threats now, the last refuge of a failed manipulator. I still said nothing. He stared at me for another long, agonizing moment, searching my face for some sign, some flicker of emotion he could latch onto, that he could use. He found nothing. There was nothing there for him. Finally, with a frustrated, exasperated sigh, he gave up. He misinterpreted my silence, my lack of fight, as a sign of defeated resignation. He believed my spirit was finally broken, that I was too beaten down to even argue anymore. He thought he had won. A slow, confident smirk returned to his face. He had broken me. He had secured his prize. Fine, he said, straightening his tie, his arrogant swagger returning. Have it your way. Don't say I didn't try to be the good guy. He turned on his heel and walked back toward Isabel and his lawyer, a victorious general returning to his troops. I watched him go. I watched Isabel give him a triumphant little kiss. They thought my silence was my surrender. They had no idea it was my victory lap. When we re-entered the courtroom, the atmosphere had changed. The air was charged with a sense of finality. This was it. The main event. Marcus walked in with the confident strut of a man who had just secured a victory. He gave his lawyer a subtle, triumphant nod, a silent communication that the deal was done, that I had been handled. He sat down and gave Isabel's hand a confident squeeze, whispering something that made her smile. I took my seat beside Anya, my face a calm, unreadable mask, my heart a trip hammer in my chest. Anya gave me a questioning look. I just gave her a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. The trap had been sprung. Judge Esposito entered, her face as stern and impassive as ever. She settled herself behind the bench, put on her reading glasses and looked down at the documents in front of her. We will now address the final and most significant asset in this case. She began, her voice a dry, no-nonsense monotone that seemed to suck all the emotional energy from the room. The primary residence, located at 125 Willow Creek Lane. I chanced to glance at Marcus. He was leaning forward in his chair, a broad, confident smile on his face. He looked like a man waiting to hear his name announced as the winner of the lottery. He was so close to his prize he could taste it. His lawyer stood up. Your Honor, he began, his voice booming with a confidence that was entirely unearned. My client, Mr. Vance, has a deep and abiding connection to this property. It was the marital home for 20 years. He wishes to continue residing there to maintain a sense of stability during this difficult transition. To that end, he has been more than generous in his offers regarding the division of the other marital assets, as a demonstration of his good faith and his desire to keep the home. Judge Esposito listened to his speech without expression. When he was finished, she simply said, "Thank you, counsel. Please be seated." She then looked down at the folder in front of her. The court, she said, her voice slow and deliberate, has reviewed all the submitted financial disclosures, and more importantly, the court has reviewed the official title deed for the property in question, as filed with the county recorder's office on May 10, 2005. Marcus's smile widened. This was it. The formalization of his victory. He shot me a quick, triumphant look across the aisle. The judge adjusted her glasses and continued, her gaze fixed on the document. This is a simple matter, as it turns out. The legal ownership of the property is not, and has never been, a point of contention. She was speaking to the lawyers now, her tone almost academic. Then, she looked up, her gaze sweeping over Marcus's smiling face, and then settling on me. The final judgment was about to be delivered. The deed, Judge Esposito stated, her voice clear and precise, cutting through the thick, expectant silence of the courtroom, lists a sole owner. I saw Marcus's lawyer frown, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. This was not the language he was expecting. Marcus, however, seemed not to notice. His confident smile still firmly in place. He likely assumed it was some legal formality, a minor detail on the path to his inevitable ownership. The judge looked back down at the document, her finger tracing a line of text. The property at 125 Willow Creek Lane is registered to 1. She paused, and in that split second of silence the entire world seemed to hold its breath. Naomi Dubois. The name, my old name, a name I hadn't heard in a legal context in 20 years, echoed in the silent courtroom. It was the sound of a bomb detonating in slow motion. Marcus's smile froze on his face. It didn't fall, it just stopped. It was a rictus of confusion, a facial expression caught between triumph and a dawning monstrous horror. Dubois? Who was Naomi Dubois? Judge Esposito, oblivious to the personal drama unfolding before her, continued in her dry factual tone. It is listed on the deed, and corroborated by the mortgage origination documents, as, and I quote, her sole and separate property, acquired prior to the formalization of her married name. She finally looked up, her gaze sweeping over Marcus's frozen, uncomprehending face, then his lawyer's, which was now a mask of slack-jawed disbelief. She looked at me, a flicker of something understanding, perhaps even a hint of grim satisfaction in her tired eyes. She delivered the final, devastating blow. A simple statement of legal fact that was more brutal than any insult could have ever been. The name on the deed is hers and hers alone. The smile on Marcus's face did not just die, it shattered, it imploded. The confident, triumphant mask fell away, revealing the raw, ugly face of pure, unadulterated shock beneath. His jaw went slack, the color drained from his face, leaving behind a pasty, sickly gray. His eyes, which had been so full of confident victory just moments before, were now wide with a wild, panicked disbelief. He looked at me, a silent, desperate question in his eyes. How? I did not smile. I did not gloat. I simply met his gaze, my expression calm, my heart finally still. The judge, her work on this matter concluded, made a note on her pad. Therefore, she stated, her voice bringing the hammer down, the court finds that the property at 125 Willow Creek Lane is not a marital asset and is not subject to division in these proceedings. It is, and shall remain, the sole and separate property of the petitioner, Miss Vance. We will now move on to the division of the remaining marital assets. The rest of her words were just a dull, meaningless drone. The battle was over. The checkmate had been delivered, and the king, who had believed himself to be invincible, had just been unceremoniously and publicly removed from the board. The immediate aftermath was a satisfyingly chaotic explosion of Marcus's shattered ego. The moment Judge Esposito called the next recess, he erupted. He didn't shout at me. He turned on his own lawyer, his voice a low, venomous hiss that carried across the courtroom. How did you miss this? How? You're a divorce lawyer. Isn't a title search the first thing you do? I've been paying you a fortune, and you missed the single most important document. His lawyer, a man whose entire professional reputation had just been publicly dismantled by his own incompetence, could only stammer, his face a deep, humiliated red. We assumed the length of the marriage. I didn't stay to watch the rest. Anya and I gathered our papers and walked out of the courtroom, leaving them to the wreckage. As we walked down the long marble hallway, I felt a lightness in my step I hadn't felt in years. The rest of the divorce was a swift and brutal affair for Marcus. Without the leverage of the house, his case collapsed. His audacious demands for my business and for spousal support were dismissed by the judge as frivolous and without merit. He walked away from our 20-year marriage with his car, his pension, half of our savings, and a mountain of personal debt he had accumulated trying to keep up his image. And Isabel, I heard through the grapevine upon discovering that the beautiful house and the lavish lifestyle she had signed up for were not part of the deal, promptly and unceremoniously ended their engagement. 2 weeks after the divorce was finalized, a moving truck, much smaller and sadder than the one Jessica had used in a different story, pulled up to my house. I was not there. I had arranged for a moving company to pack and remove the last of Marcus's belongings. His suits, his golf clubs, his ridiculous antique maps, and put them in a storage unit. The first month's rent paid by me as a final ironic act of generosity. That evening, I returned home with Anya. The house was finally truly mine. The last ghost had been exorcised. We stood on the porch and I pulled out my keys. My keychain was new. It no longer held the heavy, unnecessary keys to Marcus's car or his office. It just held one key, the key to my front door. I unlocked the door, my door, and we stepped inside. The house was quiet, filled with the soft golden light of the setting sun. It smelled of lemon polish, and the faint beautiful scent of the freesia I had bought for myself that morning. Anya handed me a bottle of champagne she had been carrying. A housewarming gift, she said with a grin. For the new owner. I'm not the new owner, I said, a slow, genuine smile spreading across my face. I'm the original one. We opened the champagne and stood in the living room, the room where Isabel had planned her renovations, and raised our glasses. To Naomi Dubois, Anya said, her eyes shining. The woman who was always there, just waiting to be remembered. To Naomi Dubois, I echoed. I had not just won a house, I had not just won a divorce case. I had reclaimed something far more valuable. I had reclaimed my name, my history, and the quiet, powerful truth of my own life. And that was a victory worth celebrating.